In this episode, we're going to take a look at a new LED light I picked up, the Fotodiox 508A, which is a 508 LED light that can be battery or AC powered. Check this out. Now, the first thing I like to do in any review is to tell you a little bit about why I bought this particular piece of gear so that you can determine for yourself whether or not it's meaningful from the perspective I'm coming from. So I bought this originally to shoot at on-location shoots, and in particular, I had a gig coming up where I was going to be shooting at a reception center for a party. It's a birthday party, and I needed something that was portable. I knew it was going to be low light, it was going to be a candlelight dinner, and they wanted to capture some of the guests talking about the guest of honor, and I needed a little bit more light than the candles were likely to provide. I also planned on using it for cases where I was shooting outdoors as a fill light, and then also as probably sort of an accent light of sorts when shooting in the studio, like a rim light or a hair light. So the funny thing is that for the gig where the party, I didn't end up using this light because there was a lot more light in the venue than I had expected. They had turned the lights up quite a bit for the actual dinner part of the party, and so I didn't end up needing the light at all, which was awesome. In the future, I'm sure opportunities will arise for me to use this still. There's so many cases where I've been shooting on location, and I didn't really want to drag out the compact fluorescent softboxes just because they're really delicate, these particular ones at least, and it's a pain to kind of break them all down and transport them, whereas this LED light is super easy and quick to set up, and will come in super handy in the future. The light includes 508 daylight balanced 5600K LEDs in a panel that's about 13 inches wide here and 6 3/4 inches tall. For those that are using metric, we've got 33 centimeters across and about 17 centimeters tall. In terms of build quality, pretty impressed with the light over here. The back part here, all of this portion is metal, pretty tough metal too. And that's pretty impressive. So if this thing tipped over and hit one of these edges, I think you'd be okay. You might scrape it up a little bit, but if the stand tipped over, I think you'd be all right. This part right here is plastic. It doesn't feel especially cheap, but if that fell and you fell on this, you'd be likely to sustain some more damage. This is the power and dimmer control right here. It's a continuously variable control. It isn't marked, so you don't know exactly what percent you're at, but you know, of course you could mark it yourself if you needed to. And then over here we have, this is where the AC adapter plugs in, and we do have a battery tester. I don't have the batteries on right now. We'll look at that in just a minute here, but you do have a tester here with 4 LEDs that tells you very quickly and conveniently how much charge you have left in those batteries. Super helpful for when you're out in the field. Now over here on the front, as we talked about before, this diffusion panel that comes with it, this thing right here is just plastic, and if it fell on that, pretty sure it definitely sustained some damage. But the thumb screws here are pretty nicely done. So overall build quality, very, very happy with it. Oh yeah, one other thing here, there is a ball joint as well, which is super helpful in positioning the light and getting it aimed up just right. And the only thing that feels really plasticky is this handle here is, it's nice because you can actually adjust it out of the way, you know, once you've tightened it up, but it does feel a little flimsy. If it did fall on that, there's a good chance that thing would break. But again, we're in the $299 US price range, and this is definitely in line for what I would expect in that price range. And I think for most people, unless you are shooting all day, every day, or you know, you're really out there doing a lot of on-location work, this is sufficient build quality. It really seems pretty nicely done for that price range. The kit actually comes out pretty nicely appointed. There's this bag that it comes in, which is super helpful for storage and transport. It's got a shoulder strap. Seems to be reasonably well made. Little pocket for storing things in here. You've got your power cable that attaches to the power adapter when you're going to be using it on AC power, and this is again 120 to 240 volts, sorry, 110 to 240 volts. So you can use it in a variety of regions. The cable between, let me just show you this here, pull this out. This cable right here is not terribly long, which I think is a little unfortunate. This is the cable again from the power brick that goes to the light. And unfortunately, it's not terribly long, probably 3 feet or so. And the problem with that is that sometimes if you have your light up at 5 to 6 feet, kind of aiming down at your talent, that cable's not long enough, so you have to somehow suspend that power brick. And it's not a huge deal. You can, use some gaff tape to attach it to the light stand or whatever, but it's something to keep in mind. This is the much more generous power cable that goes from the brick to the AC power. Then you also have a battery charger and the adapter for the battery charger. And as I mentioned before, it does come with 2 rechargeable batteries. These are lithium-ion batteries, 7.4 volts, 4,400 milliamps. So they say, well, I think they call these Sony V-mount compatible, but I've heard other people say that's not true and that you wouldn't want to use these on other devices that need Sony V-mount. I don't know, I can't say. All I can say is these batteries are pretty nice. They do provide about 2.5 hours of power at full power. So if you're doing on-location stuff, something to keep in mind there, that'll give you a gauge for how long you can use these on battery power, this light on battery power without having to charge up. Then of course this just fits over those. The light fits here, and then this goes on top of that, and it all transports and stores quite nicely. So that's a nice, very, very thoughtfully done in terms of filling out the kit. Really like what they've done there. As I mentioned, a couple of batteries. You have this continuous dimmer, and this works really nicely. It's so nice to be able to really kind of fine tune in exactly the amount of light that you need. With the compact fluorescent kit that I've got, you've got 5 bulbs, and each bulb can either be on or off. This gives you a little bit more fine tuning power, which is really awesome. Also, I mentioned before, there's a battery tester here, so you can test how much charge you have left on your batteries. These are fully charged, so you get 4 LEDs. One thing I have noticed that's a little funny about it, so if I test it with the lights on, I only get 3 LEDs. If I go 100% power, it's only showing 1 LED. So I think it's really meant to get the reading when the light's off. Again, these are fully charged batteries. You can technically run it with just 1 battery. I haven't really tested that out extensively, but it does seem to work. You don't get nearly as much power, obviously. But if, for example, you're kind of running and gunning and you need to charge one, you could run it with just 1 battery, I think. Fotodiox claims that the LEDs are actually daylight white balance, and they rate it at 5600K, which is typically also what my compact fluorescents are rated, right around 5500K, I think. I think it's pretty close to that. However, I do notice that there's more of a magenta tint to it than there is typically to compact fluorescents, so we'll talk more about that in detail in just a few minutes here. Also, it does have this diffuser panel on the front, as I had mentioned before. Now, the spread of the light, or the beam of the light, is rated at 60 degrees, so it's a little bit more like a floodlight than it is like a spotlight. But I don't find that a problem. I think it's pretty versatile. It does not come with barn doors like some of the more expensive models do, but all I'm doing pretty much is just using this cheap foam core that you can buy at pretty much any office supply store, and I just use that as a flag. So if I need to keep this from spilling onto my backdrop, I'll just set this up on a light stand and make sure the light gets directed where I want it to go. In terms of light output, what I'm getting with the Fotodiox here is a reading of actually 5.6 if I'm about 4 feet away. Shutter speed of 50 is what I'm aiming for. This only has a setting for, this is an old style light meter, but around 50 I'm getting about a 5.6 at ISO 320. So that's typically what I'm shooting at when I'm shooting in the studio. That incidentally is equivalent to what I get out of my soft boxes, which are 5 compact fluorescent bulbs in each soft box, and the manufacturer of those, ePhotos, they rate those at 1500 watts. I think that's probably a little generous. They're probably closer to, I don't know, between 1000 and 1500 watts. But again, same light output from these guys here that are battery powered, which is pretty impressive. Fotodiox provides a 24-month warranty on these, so that's a really nice feature as well. And then finally, in terms of pricing, I bought mine on Amazon for $299 US. You kind of have to keep your eyes on the prices. It fluctuates a little bit strangely, at least on Amazon. Well, I guess that's not strange for Amazon, but I ordered them a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, got them. Within 3 days of ordering them, I actually happened to be on the site and saw that they had actually reduced $15 US in price. So they're kind of one of those things that are a moving target, I guess. But as of the recording of this video, they're back up to $299 US. So right around that price range, pretty good deal for what you're getting here. Okay, and then just really quickly, one warning. Fotodiox makes a couple of models at this same size with very similar names. This is the 508A, and all of these LEDs are daylight white balanced. You cannot change the color temperature on this unit. And I was okay with that. That was the one I wanted. There's another one where half of the LEDs are daylight white and the other half are tungsten balanced. And you can actually tweak the white balance output by the light. And that's kind of a cool feature. And I think most people would assume, well, why not get it? It's only like 20 bucks more. And that's true, but one thing to keep in mind is that that light, if you're shooting in a case where you need it to be daylight white balance, you only have half of the light output. So you are sacrificing some light output capacity, I guess if you want to call it, total light output, by going with that model. That might be the right one for you depending on what you're doing. In my cases, I wanted to make sure I had as much power as I needed, and I wasn't too worried about mixing with tungsten light, because typically I'll white balance for something that's more daylight white colored, and I'll put gels on everything else if I need to. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so those are the specs, but you're probably wondering, okay, that's all well and good, but how does it look? And this is what it looks like right here. I'm pretty impressed overall. It has plenty of power. When it's compared to my 1500 watt equivalent CFL softboxes, the compact fluorescent softboxes with 5 bulbs, the output's pretty much equal. But there are two things you kind of have to keep in mind with this particular light, especially if you're going to be using it with other lights, compact fluorescent lights or any other sort of light. Now, while the purported CRI rating on these lights is pretty high, and I actually believe it, the color quality is quite nice in terms of the rendering, but these lights, or this light, has a particular magenta cast to it. And that's not necessarily a problem. You can do a custom white balance like I've done here, and that works out just nicely. But if you're mixing it with other lights that have a slightly different color cast, the difference becomes pretty pronounced. And in fact, the fluorescent lights that I use, and as typically fluorescent lights do have a green cast to them, these have a magenta cast to them, which are really complementary, different sides of the color wheel, but they don't mix very well. So typically what I find when I'm using this, at least as a key light, what I have to do is actually white balance to the fluorescence, and then in post-production of doing color grading, I have to kind of manage and kind of bring it all together. So there's definitely some things to keep in mind there. Here's an example of where I white balance to the LED light, and you can see how green the fluorescence came out. And again, they're being used on as a rim and up above as a hair light. And then here's another example where I actually color balance to the fluorescent lights and let the LED lights just sort of fall where they fell. And this is without any sort of correction whatsoever. So you can see there's definitely a difference in terms of color. So definitely something to keep in mind. Here's another example where I actually white balance to the diffused sunlight in this room, and then use the LED as a fill. And it came out okay in the end, but if I white balance to the LED, it didn't look as nice. So you really have to be careful. And I would typically, if you're mixing this light with something else, I'm finding that for whatever reason, white balancing to the other light tends to do a little bit better. Second thing to keep in mind with this light is that its perceived size, that is how big it looks relative to the position of your subject or your talent, is relatively small compared to, say, for example, a softbox. What that means in practical terms is that it's going to have a harder quality to the light. And what that means, hard versus soft light, hard light tends to have a more abrupt transition between the light parts and the shadows. And a softer light will have a less abrupt or a larger gradient between the light parts and the shadows. So typically when you're shooting people for interview style, typically you're going to want to use some sort of soft light source or something with a soft quality to it. So this is probably not my first choice for that. In fact, if I was going to be doing a lot of that and needed to be able to go on location, I would look at an LED light, but I'd probably look at one that's larger than this. And in fact, Fotodiox makes a 1000 bulb LED light that probably would be a better fit for those types of situations. While we're on that subject, if I were to get a full on-location kit, probably what I'd do is you could get 3 of these. That would come out to close to $900 US. That's pretty, you're starting to get into a little bit more commitment there, if you will. But rather than do that, rather than do 3, I'd actually just buy 2 of the larger 1000 LED lights from Fotodiox, and I'd use one as a key light use another one as a rim or hair light, and then use a reflector as a fill on the other side opposite the key. So I think that, again, because those would be larger, have a softer quality to them, they'd probably be a better choice if I were going to be doing a lot of on-location interview style shoots. So overall, I would say I really do love this light. Until I get a larger one, I'm probably going to be using this mainly as a rim light or as a fill light when I'm shooting outdoors, probably not typically as my key light. But I do love it, and I think it's going to be really useful for me. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for checking out the episode. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those down below. And if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that. We'll get more great videos for you on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you later.